but I was already walking toward the small second room where my sisters and I slept. Elaine murmured a soft plea to Nesta, which earned her a hiss in response. I glanced over my shoulder at my father and pointed to the deer. "Get the knives ready," I said, not bothering to sound pleasant. "I'll be out soon." Without waiting for an answer, I shut the door behind me. The room was large enough for a rickety dresser and the enormous ironwood bed we slept in, the sole remnant of our former wealth. It had been ordered as a wedding gift from my father to my mother. It was the bed in which we'd been born, and the bed in which my mother died. In all the painting I'd done to our house these past few years, I'd never touched it. I slung off my outer clothes onto the sagging dresser, frowning at the violets and roses I'd painted around the knobs of Elaine's drawer, the crackling flames I'd painted around Nesta's, and the midnight sky, whorls and yellow stars standing in for what? Whorls of yellow stars standing in for white around mine. I'd done it to brighten the otherwise dark room. They'd never commented on it. I don't know why I'd ever expected them to. Groaning, it was all I could do to keep from collapsing onto the bed. We dined on roast venison that night. Though I knew it was foolish, I didn't object when each of us had a small second helping until I declared the meat off limits. I'd spend tomorrow preparing the deer's remaining parts for consumption, then I'd allot a few hours for currying up both hides before taking them to the market. I knew a few vendors who might be interested in such a purchase, though neither was likely to give me the fee I deserved. Money was money, and I didn't have the time or the funds to travel to the nearest large town to find a better offer. I sucked on the tines of my fork, savoring the remnants of fat coating Savoring the remnants of fat coating the metal. My tongue slipped over the crooked prongs. The fork was part of a shabby set my father had salvaged from the servants' quarters while the creditors ransacked our manor house. None of our utensils matched, but it was better than using our fingers. My mother's dowry flatware had long been since sold. My mother. Imperious and cold with her children, joyous and dazzling among the peerage who frequented our former estate, doting on my father, the one person whom she truly loved and respected. But she also had truly loved parties, so much that she didn't have time to do anything with me at all save contemplate how my budding abilities to sketch and paint might secure me a future husband. Had she lived long enough to see our wealth crumble, she would have been shattered by it, more so than my father. Perhaps it was a merciful thing that she died. If anything, it left more food for us. There was nothing left of her in the cottage beyond the ironwood bed and the vow I'd made. Every time I looked toward a horizon and wondered if I should just walk and never look back, I'd hear that promise I made 11 years ago as she wasted away on her deathbed. Stay together and look after them. I'd agreed, too young to ask why she hadn't begged my elder sister or my father, but I'd sworn it to her, and then she died. And our miserable human world, shielded only by the promise made by the High Fae 5 centuries ago, in our world where we'd forgotten the names of our gods, a promise was law. A promise was currency. A promise was your bond. There were times when I hated her for asking that vow of me, perhaps delirious with fever she hadn't even known what she was demanding, or maybe impending death had given her some clarity about the true nature of her children and her husband. I set down the fork and watched the flames of our meager fire dance along the remaining logs, stretching out my aching legs beneath the table. I turned to my sisters. As usual, Nesta was complaining about the villagers. They had no manners, they had no social graces, they had no idea just how shoddy the fabric of their clothes was, even though they pretended that it was just as fine as silk or chiffon. Since we had lost our fortune, their former friends dutifully ignored them, so my sisters paraded about as though the young peasants of the town made up a second-rate social circle. I took a sip from my cup of hot water. We couldn't afford tea these days, as Nesta continued her story to Elaine. "Well, I said to him, 'If you think you can just ask me so nonchalantly, sir, I'm going to decline.' And do you know what Thomas said?" Arms braced on the table and eyes wide, Elaine shook her head. "Thomas Mandray?" I interrupted. "The woodcutter's second son?" Nessa's blue-gray eyes narrowed. "Yes," she said, and shifted to address Elaine again. "What does he want?" I glanced at my father. No reaction, no hint of alarm or sign that he was even listening. Lost to whatever fog of memory had crept over him, he was smiling mildly at his beloved Elaine, the only one of us who really bothered to speak to him at all. "He wants to marry her," Elaine said dreamily. I blinked. Nesta cocked her head. I'd seen predators use that movement before. I sometimes wondered if her unrelenting steel would have helped us better thrive even, if she hadn't been so preoccupied with our lost status. Is there a problem, Feyre? She flung my name like an insult, and my jaw ached from clenching it so hard. My father shifted in his seat, blinking, and though I knew it was foolish to react to her taunts, I said, "You can't chop wood for us, but you want to marry a woodcutter's son?" Nesta squared her shoulders. I thought all you wanted was for us to get out of the house, to marry off me and Elaine so you can have enough time to paint your glorious masterpieces. She sneered at the pillars of foxglove I'd painted along the edge of the table, the colors too dark and too blue, with none of the white freckling inside the trumpets, but I'd made do, even if it killed me not to have white paint, to make something so flawed and lasting. I drowned the urge to cover up the painting with my hand. Maybe tomorrow I'd just scrape it off the table altogether. "Believe me," I said to her, "the day you want to marry someone worthy, I'll march up to his house and hand you over. But you're not going to marry Thomas." Nesta's nostrils flared delicately. "There's nothing you can do. Claire Better told me this afternoon that Thomas is going to propose to me any day now. And then I'll never have to eat these scraps again," she added with a small smile. "At least I don't have to resort to rutting in the hay with Isaac Hale like an animal." My father let out an embarrassed cough, looking to his cot by the fire. He'd never said a word against Nesta, from either fear or guilt, and apparently he wasn't going to start now, even if this was the first he was hearing of Isaac. I laid my palms flat on the table as I stared her down. Elaine removed her hand from where it lay nearby, as if the dirt and blood beneath my fingernails would somehow jump onto her porcelain skin. "Thomas's family is barely better off than ours," I said, trying to keep from growling. "You'd be just another mouth to feed. If he doesn't know this, then his parents must." But Thomas knew. We'd run into each other in the forest before. I'd seen the gleam of desperate hunger in his eyes when he spotted me sporting a brace of rabbits. I'd never killed another human, but that day my hunting knife had felt like a weight at my side. I kept out of his way ever since. "We can't afford a dowry," I continued, and though my tone was firm, my voice quieted. "For either of you. If Nesta wanted to leave, then fine, good. I'd be one step closer to attaining that glorious, peaceful future, to attaining a quiet house and enough food and time to paint. But we had nothing, absolutely nothing, to entice any suitor to take my sisters off my hands." "We're in love," Nesta declared, and Elaine nodded her agreement. I almost laughed. When had they gone from mooning over aristocrats to making doe-eyes at peasants? "Love won't feed a hungry belly," I countered, keeping my gaze as sturdy as possible. As if I'd struck her, Nesta leaped from her seat on the bench. "You're just jealous. I heard them saying how Isaac is going to marry some Greenfield village girl for a handsome dowry." So had I. Isaac had ranted about it the last time we'd met. "Jealous?" I said slowly, digging down deep to bury my fury. "We have nothing to offer them. No dowry, no livestock even. While Thomas might want to marry you, you're a burden." "What do you know?" Nesta breathed. "You're just a half-wild beast with the nerve to bark orders all hours of the day and night. Keep it up, and someday, Feyre, you'll have no one left to remember you or to care that you ever existed." She stormed off, Elaine darting after her, cooing her sympathy. They slammed the door to the bedroom, hard enough to rattle the dishes. I'd heard the words before, and knew she only repeated them because I'd flinched that first time she spat them. They still burned, anyway. I took a long sip from the chipped mug. The wooden bench beneath my father groaned as he shifted. I took another swallow and said, "You should talk some sense into her." He examined a burn mark on the table. "What can I say? If it's love, it can't be love, not on his part. Not with his wretched family. I've seen the way he acts around the village. There's one thing he wants from her, and it's not her hand, and we need hope as much as we need bread and meat," he interrupted, his eyes clear for a rare moment. "We need hope, or else ourselves we cannot endure. So let her keep this hope, Feyre. Let her imagine a better life, a better world." I stood from the table, fingers curling into fists, but there was nowhere to run in our two-room cottage. I looked at the discolored foxglove painting at the edge of the table. The outer trumpets were already chipped and faded. The lower bit of the stem rubbed off entirely. Within a few years it would be gone, leaving no mark that it had ever been there, that I'd ever been there. When I looked at my father, my gaze was hard. There is no such thing.